promoted for our election to the UN Human Rights Council. We oppose the death penalty both at home and abroad, and we are happy to work with countries who are seeking to abolish the death penalty and work with them as they make these legislative changes.
Okay, to Cambodia, and you said yesterday that ASEAN nations meeting this weekend would have quite a bit to say about the Hun Sen regime and the so-called sham election recently in that country. What can we expect out of ASEAN?
Australia has stated very strongly that the election was clearly not free and open, given the Cambodian government's actions in suppressing the activities of the opposition, the media and civil society in Cambodia. There is an ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting this weekend in Singapore, and I would expect that the Cambodian election would be a topic of discussion, because Cambodia is a member of ASEAN. The ASEAN nations commit to a range of values and principles, including free and open and fair elections, and I imagine that this will be a topic of discussion. And of course Australia attends the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and I'll certainly make my views and the views of the Australian government known.
The silence from ASEAN nations in the past on issues like this has been pretty deafening. Are you confident that they are going to speak out loudly enough? Do they risk falling into irrelevance if they don't tackle these issues, these important issues of governance?
At the forum over the weekend there will be nations represented from beyond the 10 ASEAN nations. So the United States is there, China, Russia, Australia, Japan, South Korea. There are a number of nations present, and issues like this are debated in the various forums. So it's not just the 10 ASEAN nations, but it's beyond that. I believe that it is a fundamental issue for ASEAN to tackle. That is the conduct of their members. The issue of Myanmar, for example, and what's happened with the Rohingyas and the humanitarian crisis is also a topic for discussion, because Myanmar is an ASEAN member.
Is Australia considering sanctions against Cambodian officials?
We will in the meantime engage with the Cambodian government and make our concerns known and seek a response from the Cambodian government. We'll also discuss with other like-minded nations, including the United States and others, as to what would be an effective response. We have a number of options that we are currently considering.
And are sanctions included within those options being considered?
We have a number of options we're currently considering.
What did you think when you saw the Four Corners episode this week and the Cambodian leader Hun Sen on Australian soil making death threats against the children of an opposition figure who had sought refuge in Australia?
It was a deeply disturbing report. These are matters that we raised with the Cambodian government. Hun Sen was in Australia to attend the first ASEAN Australia Leaders Summit. He met with Prime Minister Turnbull. We raised this issue, we raised issues with the Cambodian government, and we're deeply concerned about the situation there.
Now to the South China Sea and tensions there. There's talk of a draft code of conduct being drawn up by ASEAN nations ahead of this weekend's meeting. Do you think that would be helpful, or, as some critics suggest, just political theatre?
It would depend what was in the code of conduct. The ASEAN nations have agreed to negotiate a code of conduct with China. Not all of the members of ASEAN are in fact claimants in the South China Sea. About 6 are not. So it would be a document that would have to take into account claimants and non-claimants. We haven't seen the content of it, so it would depend what was agreed and whether it was to be enforced. What we urge is for all claimants to negotiate their differences peacefully and recognise their right, if those negotiations don't lead to an outcome, recognise their right to go to arbitration or conciliation under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. That is what Australia and Timor-Leste did over the Timor Sea maritime boundary. We submitted to a conciliation process, and we've now concluded a treaty resolving that issue between us. So we would urge other nations to do likewise.
Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.